Stanford University.
We'd like to begin, so please take your seats for the next session, which concerns CCARE research and experiments on compassion. We'll be having two sessions, this session before lunch, then a second session after lunch where we'll be speaking about research. So CCARE has engaged and supported research and experiments, and these experiments and research have already begun to bear fruit, and we're going to be turning now to that research immediately. Let me introduce the new people up on the stage to you. There's Brian Knutson, who is Associate Professor of Psychology. Would you raise your hand just so they know you are? Great, okay. Associate Professor of Psychology at Stanford University. He's the principal investigator at the Stanford Symbiotic Project in the Affective Neuroscience Laboratory. Sounds like quantum mechanics to me. Where his research seeks to elucidate the influences of emotions on decision making. Thank you, thank you, Brian, for being here. Bill Harbaugh, Professor of Economics, University of University of Oregon. Bill describes the focus of his research as an effort to use methods from neuroeconomics and experimental economics to study altruism and motives for charitable giving, the economic behavior of children, and decision-making in risky situations. Thank you, Bill. And then finally, Karl Deisseroth, who's an MD, PhD, Associate Professor of Bioengineering and Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. He's invented a new field, which we'll be learning something about, called Optogenetics, combining optics and genetics to probe mammalian neural circuits. Welcome to all of you. And we'll be beginning with a 10-minute presentation by Brian concerning his research. Then we're going to be doing each of these presentations in sequence, 10 minutes each, and then we'll come into conversation with His Holiness concerning the themes that were brought up in the research. All right?
Thank you. It is wonderful to see you again. Last time we were on this stage, you suggested that we measure compassion. So I will try to describe to you some early projects in which we attempted to measure compassion. And this represents a true collaboration between neuroscientists and Buddhists, Thupten Jinpa, and Bryce Merritt, who's in the audience. So he will correct me if I'm wrong. One of the challenges that we faced in this project is how to define compassion. And I'm happy to report that if you look at psychologists, how they define compassion, and Buddhist scholars, there is some overlap. There are some common elements, and they include identification with another person, as you described yesterday, experiencing their suffering and wishing them to be free of the suffering. You also talked about second-level compassion, not just towards people we like or people we're related to, but also people we may not like or may not be related to. This is, of course, more difficult. And it raises the question, at least in many non-practitioners' minds, why practice compassion? It's unpleasant. So in addition to trying to induce and measure compassion, we were curious whether there was a lasting impact of compassion and whether that impact could be positive. To illustrate the challenges in this kind of research, I'd like to just pose this question: are you more compassionate than average? Now, I think I know your answer. But I also think that I could bet if I asked people in a large room, more than 50% of them would agree that they were more compassionate than average. This is a statistical impossibility. So we have to think about very carefully about how we're going to measure compassion. And our challenges are, of course, to induce in an experimental context compassion and track its impact. I'll describe two tasks in which we tried to do this. The first task, in the compassion task, which is illustrated here, subjects were instructed to extend either feelings of compassion to a face or feelings of neutrality, that is, no particular feeling at all, to other faces, repeatedly. And then they were asked how well they thought they did on each trial. So it's a very simple task, and we used this definition to instruct them how that they should feel this person's suffering, try to identify with them. The second task, which has been called affective misattribution task by psychologists, is different. There's a different task. In this task, subjects rate how positive they feel when they look at abstract paintings. Now, the trick of this task is we also show them something before the paintings. We show them the faces from the previous task, sometimes very rapidly, so they can just barely see them, okay? And sometimes subliminally. The prediction is if the act of extending compassion induced a positive attitude towards a person, it should bleed over into how people respond to the paintings. When we look at the data and we look at how positively they rated the paintings, what we see is that a systematic difference in which when people are exposed to paintings that are paired with a compassion-related face, or that they extended compassion to, they rate that painting more positively than if they see a painting that's paired with a neutral face. This is true for the visible presentation of faces. But what about when people don't even know they've seen the faces? In other words, are they remembering what they did and somehow cueing off that? We see actually this graph looks the same as the other. It's actually a stronger effect. So even if people are unaware that they've seen a face to which they've extended compassion, they feel more positive about something associated with that face. These are completely neutral strangers that the subjects have never encountered before. We see group differences in this effect, but you can also ask the question, are some people more susceptible to this effect? They feel more positively when they do this exercise. And the answer is yes. And you can ask, does this have anything to do with what you do in the real world, behavior in the real world? So we asked our subjects on standard psychological measures how empathic they thought that they were, how much they thought they could identify with other people's suffering. And there are individual differences in this. And we tried to relate it to the size of this effect. And what we found was not a significant relationship between this measure and the size of our effect. However, and this ties into Bill's presentation, which will be next, when we ask people less obvious questions, like if I gave you $100 and you could keep some of it and give some to your mother, your cousin, the postman, a stranger, how much would you keep for yourself? The same with time. If you had 100 hours, how much would you spend alone versus with others? Then we started to see a relationship. So there it is. The bottom axis is the strength of the compassion carryover effect, the x-axis, and the y-axis, the vertical axis, is how much money or time people reported that they would give to others. Now, these are college students that we're investigating, and we've begun. They're doing great. They can do this. But we're also interested in other practitioners of compassion, of course, and we're also interested in the neural basis of extending compassion. So we've taken this compassion task into the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. and ask people to do the task. We're particularly interested in parts of the brain that are implicated in anticipating good things. Now, there are parts of the brain that are highlighted in white here, deep in the brain. So if Karen Armstrong gave a talk last night about the lizard brain, this is traditionally thought of as a very ancient part of the brain. But it's also a part of the brain that is active when people anticipate all kinds of different rewards, including money, including tasty treats, including seeing attractive other people. We also know, and this will tie into Karl's presentation, that a neuromodulator called dopamine is released in this region, and that the release of that chemical can promote approach behavior. When we look at undergrads in this task, and we look at the comparison of extending compassion or neutrality, we don't see a whole lot in this region. Well, we've also had the good fortune, through yourself and through Jinpa, to investigate a few practitioners that we call adepts. These are practitioners that have meditated over 10,000 hours. And they are rare. And we've also had them do this very laboratory-based task. What we see in these practitioners is when they extend compassion versus neutrality, we start to see recruitment of these reward processing areas. It's important to emphasize that we're at the very beginning of this research, and it's underway, but we think we already have good evidence or hope that compassion can be elicited in the laboratory, that we can actually track something that carries over. And that extending compassion may be a trainable skill. Sorry, Jinpa. Go ahead. And we think there are interesting implications that we hope to explore. We want to further investigate adepts, but also novices who receive training that you'll hear about later today. We also are interested in developing any kind of technology that will help us to measure the impact of compassion. And there is a lot of exciting technology here in Silicon Valley that we would like to explore. And finally, what I'm most excited about is leveraging the conceptual synergy between Buddhist scholars and neuroscience researchers. So I'd just like to thank Jinpa and Bryce, who's in the audience, and also CCARE for supporting this research, and also you for supporting not only the practice, but the study of the practice of compassion.
Thank you very, very much, Brian. I'm going to ask Bill and Brian to change seats so that you can get up close with His Holiness, and then we'll be turning to his presentation next. As we boot it up, Bill Harbaugh. Thank you.
Okay, so I should say that this is joint work with psychologists, Ulrich Meyer at the University of Oregon, and also some economists, Jim Andreoni at the University of San Diego, California, San Diego. So we do this work with psychologists, but the economists on this project, we get a little bit nervous about the word compassion. It's not that we don't believe that people can be compassionate, and it's not that we don't believe that the world badly needs compassionate behavior by people. We know that there are many important things that economic systems, competitive economic systems, free market economic systems, cannot deliver to the world. And all we have to do is look around ourselves and see the suffering that people have to endure and understand that the system is not working perfectly and that compassion would improve things. But still, this idea of a word that we can't measure leaves a little bit of unease in our minds. So when economists study compassionate behavior, we tend to focus on charitable giving because it's in dollars, and that's really easy to measure. So this talk is going to focus on charitable giving. And particularly if I can get this to change slides. Yeah, okay. Sorry, back up. Okay, so we're going to look at charitable giving, and we're going to focus on actions. So the idea of economics is that people will say lots of things, and there be lots of potential explanations for their actions. But by focusing on the actions, we feel that we can get, first of all, we're focusing on what's really important, the outcome rather than the intentions. To us, that's important. And second of all, we feel that we can get a better understanding of the motives by looking at the actions which are inherently observable and measurable in dollars. So that's the general approach of economics. But we got to admit, we have to admit that when it comes to charitable giving, that's a strange action that involves a person giving up something that's valuable to them to someone else. This is not going to be trivial to explain. So the motives are tough to untangle, and that's what I'm going to try to do a little bit of in this talk. When we look at people, we see huge variation in charitable giving across individuals and across circumstances. I'm going to show you a little bit of data on that, and then also a little bit of data on the neural rewards for charitable giving. Because when I said that economists focus on observable things like money, well, that was true 10 years ago. Now we have new technology that looks inside the brain as people make decisions, and boy, we really feel like we need to start using that new technology to understand a complicated behavior like charitable giving better. So we have a very simple, straightforward research protocol experiment. We bring subjects in, and again, we're picking on undergraduates. We bring them into a laboratory. We give them $100, payment for being in the experiment, which takes a long time. And while they're in the experiment, they are going to observe and participate in transfers of money from their $100 to a food bank, which provides food for hungry people in the local area, okay, on a very good cause. Sometimes these transfers of money are going to be mandatory, like a tax. We tell this subject, yeah, we gave you $100, but now we want $30 of it back, and you don't have anything to say about that, like a tax. Sometimes they're going to be voluntary, so we say, sometimes we give the subject a choice. You want to give the $30 or not, like charitable giving, okay? Both things. And furthermore, sometimes the transfers will be cheap, and sometimes they'll be expensive. So in your talk yesterday, you said that compassion could be a balance between the cost to yourself and your ability to help other people. And we want to have that in the experiment as well. So here's, first of all, here's the part of this that is standard economics. You all have seen demand curves. And so on the horizontal axis here on the bottom, it's as you move out to the right, it just becomes more expensive to help the charity. So on the left, you can help the charity at very little cost to yourself. On the right part of it, it's expensive for you to help the charity. On going up is how often people will make the voluntary decision, the gift to the charity. And sure enough, every economist would have told you this already. When it's cheap to do something, people do a lot of it. If I put on the vertical axis the number of shoes that you buy, when shoes are cheap, people buy a lot of shoes. Shoes get expensive, not so much. Okay, so all we're saying is that charitable behavior is also a process of balancing the benefits and the costs. It's rational. But because of this new fMRI technology, we can do a little bit more. We can see inside the brain as people consider these transfers of money from themselves to other people. And that's new. So you heard Brian talk about the nucleus accumbens, and you'll hear Karl talk more about the dopaminergic system. And these are areas that are closely tied to the anticipation of rewards. And so in this experiment, I forgot to mention this, while they were being given the $100 and making these decisions, they were inside an fMRI scanner, and we were imaging their brain. So here's what we find when we do that. We look at the same areas that we know from research on animals and so forth are tied to the processing of unexpected rewards. And we ask, do these areas activate as we change the payoffs to the subject? And what you see there, these are, I think, the lizard areas we were calling them earlier. They're evolutionarily ancient parts of the brain. We know they're tied to processing rewards. As Brian said, when a person gets money, that's a reward. And that part of the brain lights up. It activates more. What's new, though, is to show the blue parts. When the charity gets money, those same, very similar, closely tied, you can see spatially, parts of the brain also activate. So this is evidence that there's some primary reward that people get deep inside their brain from seeing money go from themselves to help provide food for other people. Okay? So this is something new that we can do with the new technology. And the next thing we try to do is maybe a little more scientific. Instead of just observing, we try to predict. And so here, on the horizontal axis, as you move out to the right, you have the subjects who show the most activation as the charity gets money. As we take money from them, give it to the charity, we have some subjects whose brains activate a lot. Other subjects, not so much. Those subjects are on the left-hand side of the diagram. On the vertical axis is in the charitable giving part of the experiment. How often do they give money away? And each dot is a human being. And you can see on average, the more activation they get when they see the charity get money to do the good causes, the more likely the person is to make the voluntary gift when they're given an opportunity to do that. So,
His Holiness is wondering, because in the Buddhist psychology, we contrast generosity with another mental, characteristic, which is sometimes translated as avarice. I don't know if that's the right avarice or miserliness. So he was wondering whether any research has been done on trying to figure out the brain location of that kind of.
I think Brian knows more about avarice.
I'm not going to implicate my subjects.
The avarice and miserliness, left, right?
Yeah, left. Did I say right? Yeah. So yes, the brain responds to money for oneself. Avarice, I don't know. Maybe it's just self-interest, right? And on the left are those people whose brains respond more to the money than to seeing the money go to the charity, okay? And sure enough, those people, on average, those people don't give very much when they're given a chance. But there's some exceptions, right? So it's a general rule, but not everyone follows it. So then the last thing I'll conclude is that this research shows that people do get a neural reward from charitable giving. And it's very closely tied to the rewards that they get for getting things from themselves. So people are making a balance between the benefits to others, the cost to themselves, sort of rationally. The last part is that this activation tends to be higher when people make the choice voluntarily, rather than having the money taken away from them by us in the experiment. And we call that, economists call that, Jim Andreoni calls that, the warm glow of charitable giving. There's an extra benefit from having chosen to make the gift yourself. And so when we go back to the focus of economists on actions, measurable actions, rather than on emotions, maybe economists are a little too simplistic, that this warm glow emotion can kind of be measured now and can drive behavior in a way that I think is very important to rectifying some of the obvious issues with a simple free market system.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was great. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask that Karl and Bill swap places so that Karl, our last speaker, Deisseroth, will be speaking to us concerning his research on neural circuits. And then we'll come into a conversation in the final time that we have before lunch. So Karl, you're on.
So thank you. Thanks to you all for being here. And I want to say how honored I am to share our work here in this setting, and thank you for coming to Stanford. So I work on a technology in my bioengineering laboratory here at Stanford that allows us to reach in and turn brain cells on or off using pulses of light. And for me, this is a fascinating research tool. It will allow us to hopefully understand neural circuits, how they work well and how they fail to work. I'm also a psychiatrist. I treat patients who have problems with depression. People who have depression often don't feel the same social or pro-social impulses. They don't feel the same reward or warm glows that healthy people have. And so everything is tied together, but it's a very challenging problem that will take us a while to sort out. You've heard the word pro-social already today in the context of compassion. And it's possible that pro-social instincts are tightly linked to basic mammalian instincts to nurture, to care. And we are now trying to take advantage of this possible link using our new tools to understand pro-social behavior and how it might relate to things like nurturing and other forms of compassion. Compassion is a human trait, but animals also show nurturing. An example of this is shown here. You can knock out a gene in mice, and the two images on the left show normal behavior in mice. A mother with some young pups, you can see they're clustered together in a nice little pile, the two images on the left, and the mother will usually position herself over the pups to keep them warm and feed them. You can knock out a particular gene, and what happens is what's seen on the right. It's yeah, and so you can see there's not nurturing going on. The young pups are left on their own, which is not a good situation for them. Now, this shows that this nurturing is biological. This is a gene, but it doesn't yet provide us with deep insight into compassion or nurturing. The brain is not a bucket of genes. The brain is much more complex than that. And one thing that the brain is at a deeper level is a connection of different cells that influence each other like a network. And the essence of our technology that we call optogenetics is to be able to turn on or turn off different parts of that network using brief millisecond scale pulses of light to really speak the language of the brain. And so, for example, the image on the left there, the red molecule is a molecule that when you pulse it with blue light will activate neurons. And the molecule on the right, the green one, if you deliver yellow light to it, it will turn neurons or brain cells off. And what we do is we put these molecules into neurons, and then we can turn them on or off with light. And this is something that gives us a power that you would not have with older tools like drugs or with electrodes. And we can just use fiber optics. This is something that folks in Silicon Valley are no stranger to. You can play information down fiber optics, and in this case, it's pulses of light that come in. And you can see this. You can see the sawtooth-like spiky traces. Those three lines on the bottom show neurons responding to pulses of light. Those little spikes are the neural code, the neural language of information that we're playing in using pulses of light in a fiber optic. And so we went in. You've heard about some regions deep in the brain that help us with perhaps the feeling of the warm glow, however it might be elicited, or with feelings of compassion. And this is a region here that's listed as the VTA. This is an area that generates a molecule called dopamine. So we went in there and we found that we could make animals pro-social. So it's the opposite of the genetic intervention I showed you earlier, where the animals became less nurturing. Now we're turning it up, and we're playing in a particular pattern of activity into these neurons deep in the brain of mammals. And what's shown here on the right is a case, the bar on the right is a case where we're not playing in this pattern of activity through the fiber optic. And it's compared to the bar on the left where we are. And you can see elevated social behavior in these animals. They're more interested. This is one rodent that's being presented with a juvenile, same-gender rodent of the same species. There's no particular value of that other individual to the animal, apart from a pure interest in what you might call social.
Optogenetics lab jogal gene ya phako ya ta tubiya de member che gene ya lu thamo stanje ene yogo the che the genetic the gene koran ya chu gyapje de chigorwa tataji amadi gene ji member se bin zan ti kengen pulia so me che ta koran de delia lo ta chen ko kertu zeo yong ya.
So we can reach in and make the animals more social. The movie shows the control case, the case where we're not playing in any activity. And the larger animal, as you can see, is, if anything, running away from the smaller animal. So the larger animal... There's a little bit of interaction, as you can see, a little bit of curiosity, novelty, but in general, not a strong, what you might call apparent social interest. Now here's a case. You can recognize the larger animal by the little white cap where the fiber optic comes in. So a very, very different situation. Now, this is only the beginning. There's a long way to go. This is pro-social, clearly. What's really going on is you can imagine many different reasons for that and many opportunities to further sort out the nature of the circuitry that's underlying this pro-social behavior. And Another step then will be to extend this to understand the links between the social behavior and the social interaction that the mother and the pups have, and then to extend that to other forms of behavior as well. The goal is to slowly start to piece together how mammals value social behavior, and this is ultimately, we think, perhaps linked to compassion. So I'm very grateful to the individuals who have worked on this. The names are here: Joel Finkelstein, Jim Doty, and Lisa Gneiden, who has led the research in the laboratory. And as well, I want to express my gratitude for CCARE and the visionary nature of the feelings that led to its founding and support. So thank you.
So in our last 10 minutes before lunch, we'd like to take up the remarkable research that we've just seen in 3 different areas. And each of them seem to focus on what has become the warm glow, or the blue light of compassion. And Your Holiness, I know that on the one side, you've spoken about this warm glow that one feels benefit oneself through compassion. But I also know that you've spoken about the importance of motivation, that motivation for a particular action can translate into whether that action is virtuous or non-virtuous in character. Here we have compassionate and altruistic behavior. What's the role of motivation? What's the role of motivation in these kinds of behaviors?
조지네 니지 제베나 수수수 간다 디용도 들려서 양갑 가실 군드네 간다 레상에다 차원 이게 류스에다 세와 희망이 들어도 군론 라리 그래서 가는 거 봐. 그래서 군론도 계속 무시고 장을 되가 군론 돌이 되시 가르쳐요.
그렇으니 쇼스가사.
단디 베네타.
들어. 그런 게.
니지 때문에 샴페인 그거 봐. 수수기 원하는 사람들 니지 겁나 군론데.
정말요.
나오 다디 거입니다.
따이네 근데 있는데 니지 편유 섬들잖아요. 랑키와 상당 거로. 그게 저는 배지들이 long term, short term 뒤어죠. long term energy holistic 디자인의 대인도 개변시 통하네. 나도 남규 즉 biological factor 영어도 되지 temperature.
네. 이제 동물수 니지 개별값을 샴페인도 군론도 효제예요. So here His Holiness feels that one needs to make a distinction between the role of motivation. For example, when you want to cultivate compassion, you need to value compassion. And for that, it is important to reflect upon the benefits of compassion, including benefit to oneself. So that's a kind of having a bigger picture.
Maybe, as I usually mentioned, the sense of sort of closeness feeling or sense of concern, one biological factor. So
for that kind of more immediate instinctual kind of compassion, you don't need to see the bigger picture, not appreciate the value of compassion.
That, as I usually mentioned, biased, very limited, and very much mixed with attachment. Now, second level of compassion, that only intelligent people can practice, or intelligent animals. That means
animals
human being, cannot practice within these
animals.
So there, I think, out of awareness, the long-term benefit, then practice that. It changes.
So another point His Holiness is making is that when you actually generate compassion for someone, at that instant, the motivation is really other regarding. So there, in the moment of compassion, the motivation is for the benefit of the other. But from a wider point of view, when you value compassion, then you need to reflect upon benefits of compassion. That must include recognition of benefits to yourself as well. So the distinction needs to be made.
like to open then the floor for conversation, questions from any of the presenters, comments.
나한테 콘을 그리신 되죠. 아도 로어 스탄체 체니 야나지 진지 맵서는 그 시기 주고도와.
네.
어느 가서 진지 규주다는 롱라멜 소토르베.
So this is a question to you, Karl. Your work involved switching on and off of a particular gene expression, and you can see the effects through your work. So His Holiness is wondering, can we do something similar for, say, for example, like anger?
For anger.
Oh,
Yeah.
if through technology, if you invent something, they remove anger through electro.
Like the light pulse.
Then, grateful. Everybody need that. Anger really creates a lot of problems, as well as your own peace of mind. So anger almost is no use. So if some method is to remove that without practice, it is much easier. So here, again, I think we need investigation. Certain category of emotion can change through that technique. Certain emotion, I don't think you can do that way. So, the consistency of chodo.
So His Holiness is wondering whether we can, do a research where to kind of try to understand the kind of degree to which these kind of manipulation can actually have an effect.
That's a very interesting question, and it's well posed in the sense of, are there some things that you can change and some things that you can't? I would put anger in the same category as things you can change. It's a very well-defined experience. It happens in animals. You can see bursts of aggression that look much like anger in human beings. We have some idea of which neural circuits might underlie anger. Or when studying animals, you might call this aggression. And this is something that is certainly worthy of study. It could be studied. There are also maybe things that we can't change that are more fundamental to being alive, to being mammals, but I don't think anger is one of them. So this is another possible area of research.
anger map charge in bed
So now, wouldn't there be a danger if you remove the anger part of the brain that you might become kind of dull? Unable to distinguish, what is, right and wrong.
I think biologically, anger attachment, biologically, this is something, the anger, suppose, defend yourself from danger, protect yourself from danger. Anger. Attachment is bring those positive thing. I mean, something helpful to survive yourself, bring together. So that's a mental level. Both are for survival. Now anger goes extreme way or beyond the limit, or then the problems start. So if you remove anger, then that may not realize where is the danger. That is it is because of that. But nyangka kawaii mashi bishabina, leg the nyedi mashi bishe, right? Go back to thought on your chache.
So, for example, if you create an animal or a creature that has no ability of that part of the brain, like anger, then maybe the part of the brain that is able to detect danger sign and respond to it maybe get knocked out, and also what is good to you and what is not good to you, that ability to distinguish might also disappear.
Of course, our sense of justice, for example, even if it doesn't relate to us, if we see injustice done elsewhere, that can create an anger which could be useful. the question is, can we achieve the same level of motivation that we need to address injustice without anger, but with something else? That's a deep question, and I don't know the answer. And of course, there are more ethical and philosophical issues as well. Many wonderful works of art have arisen from despair and anger, and it's part of our shared human experience, not something to be trifled with lightly.
The brain thought true shivada, that true soul that that's down raps to that tenju is memche. Ranza namanas get moshe. Jidan true samashisha, but true shivada, motu shiva, levatani yachitu tumane.
So I'm just wondering something related to this question, whether, and maybe Brian, you could get involved here as well. At the brain level of expression, can the brain make a distinction between a person who's having a kind of a delusory experience or an experience that is...
Not only human being, but even
animals.
At the same.
Some kind of illusion versus a veridical experience.
Like an hallucination? So schizophrenics, for instance, hear voices that aren't there.
No, maybe when visually perceiving something, and you may see something as something else. So that kind of optical illusion versus a perception of the real thing. Can the brain make a distinction or not really?
For example, you see from distance, some light, right? They actually you see, come from, say, kasokana, the jagwe sort of stuff.
Yeah, like a kind of a reflection in the sun of a metal piece.
이내 토마토 토인으로서는 어떻게 가서지 작화 주도 삼을 작화 외슈때 삼자 중국으로.
So you could, someone could mistake that for a reflection coming from a patch of ice.
So now same sort of eye consciousness.
Visual.
And the mental level also at the beginning believe this is reflection of metal. Yeah. But actually like that, but didn't know that. So feel and convince this is because of that
reflection coming from
reflection coming from eyes. Then someone come. No, that's not eyes, but metal. Then change. But the visual same. The mental level change. The previous illusion, later cognitive.
True cognition. Yeah.
Chama.
True cognition, valid cognition.
So on neuron level, can make distinction. The true is
So while you are at the sensory level, visual experience is the same. So at that level, can one make a distinction by simply observing at the brain?
I'm not a vision scientist, but I do know that you can distinguish between stages of visual processing, yes? And so very basic stimuli will influence primary visual cortex. And at that level, if something looks the same, it may not be distinguished. In fact, researchers here have injected signal into visual cortex, and as far as we know, induced the illusion of visual percepts in monkeys, and I think it may have been done in people as well, at least flashes, simple sensory stimuli. But at the level of realization that that's an object, you can actually use fMRI to trace the evolution of the visual signal from the primary cortex to what's called object localization cortex. Some of my colleagues study this in the psych department. And you can even go further forward, where people actually consciously recognize the object, okay? So I think the answer is that there are different stages of visual processing, and that at one level, things may appear the same to the brain, but the technology is such that we can detect other levels of processing where people may make higher order interpretations of what that is.
We're going to have to break for lunch. I think we need to break for lunch.
What?
We need to break for lunch.
Yeah.
His Holiness has.
Lunch break.
I'm sure he has appointments over lunch. We have to keep him on his schedule. So we've had a wonderful banquet this morning of education conversation on compassion and altruism. We've talked about making compassion into action for local heroes. We've talked about the basic sciences in psychology, neuroeconomics, and even neuroscience on compassion and altruism. We'll see you here after the break. Let me just read to you some instructions I was given before you head out. Please take all your belongings with you at lunchtime. Stanford University will not be responsible for lost items. Lunch will be available behind the Ariyaga Center for Sports and Recreation. When you leave this building, turn left. At the first intersection, turn left onto Galvez. The luncheon site is located on the right-hand side, approximately 450 yards down the road. It's pretty precise. Seating is available both indoors and outdoors. Here, the afternoon session will begin at 1:30 p.m. Due to security, everyone will need to be rechecked before entering the building, so plan to get back here in plenty of time, certainly not later than 1:15, and bring your ticket with you. Thank you for all being here. Thank you to His Holiness and to our presenters.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.